Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters.
To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces.
We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. Today we're talking everything LGBT plus inclusion. Firstly about a great organisation called Schools Out, and then we were talking about LGBT History Month. And we've got that, if you don't know, Sue Sanders, who'll be talking to us shortly, who has got a wealth of knowledge in LGBT plus inclusion. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, Sue. So Sue, tell us all about who you are, what organisation you're from, and we could be here all day, but just tell us what you want.
Well, thank you, Tash. Yes, my name is Sue Sanders. I was at a very early stage joined an organisation called Schools Out, which started way back in 1974, not by me, but by a group of teachers who at that stage were absolutely totally fed up with the lack of support from the unions, so got themselves together and then very quickly had to become political as one of their number got sacked when he went into a school after a very early Pride March and was asked, "Are you gay, sir?" And he said yes. And the rest became very horrendous. And I actually found that Schools Out by being asked to sign a petition. The ILIA said they would reinstate him if he agreed never to say he was gay again, which of course was totally outrageous. And I refused, I signed a petition to say that if I was asked that, I would never sign such a thing. It was an outrageous thing to ask. I then went off to Australia, did all sorts of things there, include teaching in a girls' convent school and in a women's prison and in a theatre, came back and then linked up with Schools Out and have been linked with them for a long time. And I'm now currently the CEO of Schools Out.
Brilliant. And we'll delve in a little bit more about Schools Out shortly, but I'm sitting here already, we've started, I'm shaking my head thinking, oh my gosh, how can somebody, be told they're not allowed to say their sexual...
Exactly.
I'm just sitting there in amazement thinking, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully, shouldn't be happening.
And then it got worse because, of course, we then had Section 28 for 15 years, which we had to do a lot of work on. And during that whole time that Section 28 was in, the 15 years, Schools Out did masses of work, tried to tell people that it didn't affect schools because, in fact, technically it didn't, but very few people heard that. And we also ran Paul Patrick, who was my co-chair at that point, and I ran a telephone service, which meant that teachers rang us, and we probably got 2 or 3 calls a week with teachers desperate to know what they could do about the work in schools, how they could deal with discrimination they were getting. So Schools Out was really sort of trying to do the work that unions should be doing. Things have changed massively now, but we were there that whole 15 years during Section 28.
Quickly, before we go on to Lynn, because you mentioned Section 28 a few times, and some people listening may not know.
You're right. And that would be wonderful if they don't know. It came in 1988. It was a piece of legislation which was under the Local Authority Act, which was a vicious piece of legislation which was attacking all equalities work. But this particular clause, Section 28, said thou shalt not promote homosexuality. Now, because it was under the Local Authority Act, and by that time the Conservatives have taken a lot of powers away from local authorities about schools and put it in governors, that was why it technically did not affect schools. But very few people recognised that. And through those 15 years, and Lynn was in school during that time, so she can tell you what the effect of that was. But it meant that lots of teachers went back into the closet. Lots of kids heard nothing about LGBT. And if they asked, teachers said, "Oh, I can't tell you because I might lose my job." Nobody ever was prosecuted throughout those 15 years. So there was a lot of media hype that terrified people unnecessarily. But it meant those 15 years were hell. We had a lot of bullying. The homophobic bullying in schools was exponentially horrendous. So when it finally went in 2003, a lot of work had to be done to repair all that damage. And I'm sure we'll come on to, some of the work that Schools Out did to that. But those 28 years were pretty horrendous, and it is not unsimilar to the attacks that we're seeing now on trans people. In fact, there's masses of similarities.
Yeah, but thank you for that. So, Lynn, over to you. Tell us about your role in Schools Out and a little bit about your background.
So I am Chair of Trustees for Schools Out, and I co-run Schools Out with Sue. Although we are a mighty charity in terms of reach, we're a small charity in terms of organisation. And as Sue said, the legacy of John Warburton was the teacher who lost his job. And from that early days of Schools Out, it was based as being teachers. And then it moved its focus to supporting teachers with inclusive lessons. Then we had Section 28, as Sue said, which then prevented, although it shouldn't have prevented schools, it did have an impact of preventing schools because schools didn't think they could do anything about it. And we supported we supported schools throughout that period. And then we also after Section 28, created other products, which we'll talk about a little bit more. You've nodded to those already. So my role is supporting the charity, and I also work in schools and do some school sessions as well.
Brilliant. And there's so much that you do at Schools Out. So we'll start with what you call the classroom, in terms of that work. So I'll start with Lynn and then Sue can add. Tell me something about the work, because we may have teachers out there, we might have children out there, young people who will go, well, listen, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this in our school? So tell us about the work you do.
So what I would say is Schools Out was formed really by teachers and to support teachers, because we felt that by supporting teachers, you were then impacting an entire generation. Because if you had teachers that were inclusive, you then had that process coming through. We also wanted to make sure, and this is an approach we've always said, that you look at the whole school approach if you're giving any directions and things out. So Sue came up with the idea of having a classroom site many years before we had any classroom sites, which would give free resources to teachers. And the idea was there would be free lesson plans. And I'll let Sue talk about the term usualise that she came up with, which is an important integral part of that. But the whole point was about visualising people, LGBT plus people within education, because we'd been hidden for such a long time. And the impact of not just Section 28, but just throughout history, was that LGBT people were just hidden from that space. And we wanted to create lessons from all different lesson plans so that teachers could just pepper pot it throughout the lessons. So in maths, potentially you might do one and look at angles, and you might then look at maybe pride tent and go, this is the angles used in a tent. So bringing in examples in that sense that were day-to-day examples, but making sure the LGBT plus community was represented. Now, the classroom site brought all of these resources together before you had websites and things that used to do that. And now there are quite a lot of sites that have free lesson plans and resources for teachers. But at that time, the classroom was really novel for that reason. And we continue to develop that. At the moment, we're working very much on our careers resources and showing LGBT plus people in all sorts of different careers. We've done quite a few around STEM, so science, technology, education, and maths. So kind of that was really important to us because there isn't a lot of representation in that area. But in fact, there are lots of LGBT plus people working in that area. So that was one we wanted to highlight. We also have highlighted people working in the TV and film industry. And our next batch is about medicine and healthcare. So, and schools have to do in secondary something on healthcare. So that's why we thought it was really important to have this classroom resource that pulls together all these resources that teachers could then use. And each year we add new resources to that. And that builds also on the wider work we do, which is around working with teachers' unions. So we attend the TUC conference and run a session. We also attend all the other teachers' unions conferences, and in some we speak, in others we run sessions to help teachers have the tools in which they feel confident in which to be inclusive in their classrooms. We also, the classroom kind of has branched out a bit because we do now, during LGBT History Month, which we'll talk later, we do sessions as well for schools around LGBT history. So it has branched out a bit more into that kind of other methods of doing things, and also branched out into providing media resources as well. So providing short video clips about people that through history or concepts, so that they've got more choice of resources, because we know that teachers want things for their assemblies, they want things for their tutor time, and they want things they can just pick up and grab and go. And we want to be able to facilitate that as much as possible.
Okay, lovely. And like you said, you mentioned, and I saw on your website, Sue, you term about obviously raising visibility of LGBT plus people and usualising. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean,
about the classroom.
Thank you. Well, during Section 28, we were constantly told that we weren't normal, that we were normal families and all this rubbish. So the term normal is highly problematic. It's hierarchical. The flip side of that is abnormal. So I really did not like the term normal. So I coined this word usual and usualizing, which I think a lot of people have found very helpful, because it doesn't have that hierarchical concept to it, and it doesn't have the opposite isn't negative. So the classroom usualizes LGBT plus people in all their diversity across the curriculum for all ages. So we've got history, geography, maths, English, science, everybody in both primary and secondary. So they're free lessons which simply usualize, and we've done it in Word so that teachers can download it and play with it. So, the whole point is to make it as accessible as possible and enable people to do their own thing, utilizing the concept. And I think I really recognize that we have a great debt to the disabled movement as well, because I think, the work that they've done around challenging normal and abnormal I've built on. And I think the usualizing concept people use around race, around gender, around disability. And, I think it's a useful term that people are beginning to utilize quite profoundly, I think.
Brilliant. And I love the fact that you talked about, elements, understand, like the people who had talked about race, disability, they've had similar issues, and it's how we learn from each other. And that's why
Exactly.
intersectionality is also important as well, isn't it, in terms of
crucial. I mean, right from the word go, Schools Out has always said, that here we are as a community, we are everybody. We are black, we are white, we are old, we are young, we are, Jewish, we're Gentiles. We had a whole poster very early on trying to get across the idea of the full diversity of our community and to meet the needs of the full diversity of our community. And that's been it's been our mantra, really. It's been crucial way before that wonderful word intersectionality came along. So it's, when it came along, I embraced it and thought, oh, at last we have a word for it. How wonderful.
Exactly. And I think that's what the organisations also need to do, don't they? And that's what's great about the work you do. You look at everyone, like you say, is for all. Some people may look at just the L or the G. Lynn and I have talked about the you need to look at every single reference so everybody's represented, not
exactly
just one
that
area.
Yeah.
And in terms of the work you've done in the classroom in education, I mean, gosh, I'd like to think a lot has changed from when, thinking about what you were telling me about somebody who couldn't say they were gay. What have you seen as the change within the work you're aiming to do with the schools around inclusion in schools?
Well, I think it's very patchy. I mean, I think it's very difficult to do a generalization. I mean, there are some schools doing amazing things. I mean, we know schools who have the most wonderful organizations within the school who are celebrating LGBT. We have on our website, we get to see people, what they're doing for LGBT History Month. We also hear of teachers who wouldn't dream of coming out. They don't feel safe to be out and proud as to their kids. They might be to some members of staff, but not to their pupils. And some schools, don't touch it at all. So it's very patchy. It's postcode lottery still. I think the big change has been the unions. I mean, we now have all the unions now, all the teachers' unions are fully aware of the need to support their LGBT teachers and to also produce LGBT resources. So that's the big shift. The other big shift, obviously, is now where we are legally. I mean, the fact that in 2003, Section 28 was gone. And in 2010, we had the Equality Act. And the Equality Act was so crucial in actually stating the need to be inclusive of all the protected characteristics, and to get people to think about, the fact that we can have more than one protected characteristic. So here I am, I'm a white woman, I am a lesbian, I am now old, and I am sometimes disabled. So, we all have lots of different things, and to get people to recognize that and to work with that, I think it's been very important. So the Equality Act has been crucial. And I think now, with the change of government, the Equality Act is safe, whereas previously they were talking about getting rid of it. So thank goddess we've now got a government which will support that. So I think that's crucial, that for people to grab the laws that we have and to use them effectively, and to make sure that they are meeting the needs of every child.
Brilliant. And rightly so. I asked the question, which I knew the answer when you said, what's it like in schools? And it would be patches, and like you say, it's sad that some people can't be out. What other challenges, I'll say Sue and then Lynn, have you found, because I'm sure you've had teachers come to you and say, look, I just can't move forward with this. What challenges and barriers have they faced when, schools, and what sort of advice have you given to those?
I think it's two things. I think people can be very scared of parents. There's sometimes a minority of parents who are pushing against the work. Now, it's always a minority, but they are often a very vocal minority. So, you have to be aware of what your laws are. So that's why I'm saying the Equality Act is so important. Be ready, excuse me, be ready with what you have to do. We also have now within curriculum the requirement to actually teach LGBT issues. So that's important, to be able to say, look, this is the law now. This is what we need to do, to educate both your parents as well as your senior staff. And sometimes your senior staff need some help. The shadow of Section 28 is quite long. So, you need to be aware of your union support, you need to be aware of resources, you need to look at what the law of the land is and what the advice is from the Department of Education, which has its problems, but I'm sure some of them will be solved soon. But you are legally supposed to be doing this work. The Equality Act is there, the curriculum is there. So you sit down and you find ways of making sure that you are clear what your legal requirements are, so that you can then educate your staff, your senior leadership, and your parents.
And I think people have a misunderstanding about what should be taught.
Yes.
And I think, and maybe go to you for Lynn for a minute and then come back to Sue, because when I have discussions with people, I'm like, what do you think people are being taught about LGBT plus education, inclusion? It's not what you think. It's about there's existence, it's visibility, like you said, the usability. It's not, people think, oh, they're going to be, my child is going to become gay because of this teaching. You think, what? No, it's amazing that people think is going to be taught in the schools. What are your thoughts on that, Lynn?
So I'd say I'm just going to loop back a bit, because it links in with the fact that how things have changed. Well, there has been, if you look at it over the years of Schools Out, there's mammoth change. But if you actually look at what's happened in the past 5 years, we've regressed. And so I would say it was easier to do our work 5 years ago than it is today. And that's because there's been lots of negative media and lots of negative, there's lots of othering, I think, within political spaces of different communities. And that's had a real impact among schools. So although in Scotland, for example, there is LGBT embedded into the curriculum, there isn't in England and Wales in the same way. We do have certain things that have to be done, but they are around, specifically around some around relationships and sex education, areas which are around safeguarding to make schools safe spaces for everybody. But there isn't as in Scotland, there's like an embedded in curriculum through. We don't have that yet in England, which we would love. But there is this duty that we are supposed to do things. So when you said for like primary schools, and I deal with a lot of on the primary side of things, and a lot of teachers are like, well, what are you teaching in primary school? Well, in primary school, it's literally just that there are different types of families. And that includes families with adopted children. That includes families that are looked after by grandparents. It includes same-sex families. It's very much, that's it pretty much. And that's what it says you must currently, and I say currently, we'll come to that, but currently that's what that includes. And then in sex education, if it took ages for this to come in, it's only really been very recent times that actually I think 2019 it came in, where they actually included same-sex relationships within the whole relationships and sex education, which meant generations of people were not getting any information about that. Or let's really face it, they were from the internet, and we all know how problematic that can be at times. So I'd say there's been many steps forward, but from the teachers we spoke to at the last teachers conference, which was an LGBT specific conference, there are teachers still facing the fact they can't be out in work. There are teachers still facing they can do something, but the school won't do something. And then you have brilliant schools that are using a whole school approach, and it's just embedded in along with many other things. And I think in the past 5 years, what we've seen is a lot more nervousness. So even when coming into schools and doing sessions, there's been a lot more questions about what's the material you're using. A lot of this is related around gender identity, but also related to other aspects as well. And so it's been a really challenging period. And we've also had articles that have come out from research that's come out from Just Like Us and the Proud Trust and from Diversity Role Models that looks at the impact of bullying and the impact of how important it is to have safe and inclusive schools. But what I would say is, as Sue had said, the impact of Section 28 is long. Many schools haven't really recovered from that. And we've had, for the past 5 years, pretty much a continual attacks on education, inclusive education, which has meant that we've gone backwards a bit in many ways, and there's a lot more nervousness about it. So a school that wants to do something and support their kids will, but a school that was not really sure and thinks backlash from governors or from parents isn't going to do that. So I think we really have to be clear that at this moment in time, although we've gone forward such a long way and things may change, it went so far the other way for a period of time that's had a real impact on children, on teachers, on staff, LGBT staff within all education spaces. And we really must recognise that. And we still don't know what will happen, because although we have the new sex education side of things, that there's been consultation about that recently. And that's to really take a lot of it out and almost bring in Section 28 by the back door, but for the trans community and non-binary communities. And similarly, we've had keeping safe. There's a keeping children safe in education guidance, and that basically talks about how you safeguard children. And in that, they're proposing some changes which will not safeguard trans children and trans young people. And that comes in the actual guidance changes each September. So we're coming up to September. Now, it basically does say in there, only if some other guidance comes into place. But many schools won't read the only if this new guidance comes into place, which means from September, we're preparing for the fact that we really have to get out the message there that you still have a duty to support all your LGBT plus children and young people in that space. And that is a really challenging thing that we are facing at the moment, because there have been 3 consultations. They brought in guidance, was supposed to be guidance around supporting trans and non-binary pupils. It was actually, they called it gender questioning, as opposed to using the word trans and non-binary. And the consultation's closed. We've all put our comments in. That will need to be reviewed. But it's almost been taken as that consultation is in place, because that's how it was reported in the press. So if you were just to go on the press and didn't work within the education space, you would think that was now guidance, that was now statutory guidance that you had to do, which it's not. But this is why we're saying we're at a real pivotal moment, that actually we want to make sure that education is safe for all people, including LGBT plus people, whether that be a caterer, whether that be a member of staff, whether that be a pupil. And at the minute, we've faced such assault to that inclusion over the past 5 years that we've not seen since the 80s. And it's using the same rhetoric. So I think people out there aren't really, really, really aware of it. And they think we're teaching all sorts of things in schools, when actually it's not about that. It's actually, our work is very much about highlighting the amazing stuff LGBT people have done. And it's also about making sure you have examples across education. And that's inclusive examples that look at the full spectrum of the LGBT plus community.
How could we, and I know you do this it might be a simple question, but how, those organisations, those schools who aren't doing anything because of the fear, what advice, how would you say to them now, come on, you've got to think of, impact, this, visibility. How have you, how would you encourage them? Because really they should be doing it anyway. And, poor people are not being seen, not feeling, they might, we talk a lot about psychological safety, don't we, in inclusion, and LGBT plus pupils and kids might not be having it. So, Sue, what would you say to these people? We're going to get them on board in terms of, look, really
I think
important.
one of the things that I would say is, and we're very lucky in this country in the fact that we have all these amazing history months. So, we have LGBT History Month, we have Women's History Month, we have Gypsy and Traveller, we have Southeast Asian, we have Black History Month, we have Disabled History Month. So all those history months give you a really wonderful chance to actually explore the contributions of all those people. And remember that when you're doing Women's History Month, women are black, they're disabled, they're LGBT, they're lesbian and gay, and they're trans. So across all those wonderful history months, you can constantly be inclusive. You can constantly look at that people that have been hidden by patriarchal white history, and actually start, pulling back and enabling the young people in the classroom to recognize each other and themselves and their parents and their communities, and actually be inclusive. And I think, we're very lucky in this country that we have these history months, all of which have lots of wonderful resources attached to them. So I think that's one of the really powerful ways of actually enabling people to be seen and to recognize who they are and where they've come from, and also recognize the contributions and amazing things that, other people within their community have done. Because, however white or, able-bodied their community might look, there is always that diversity. And in some ways, I can remember going into a very white school and saying, what do you do for Black History Month? Oh, we don't do anything because we don't have any black kids. And I was saying, well, that is the very reason why you need to be doing it. And of course, they often say, well, we don't have any LGBT people there. So that recognition of enabling schools to recognize, they have the full diversity, that it has been hidden for some considerable time, and the need then to actually reclaim that and enable that. And I think one of the things that is very exciting is that a lot of our museums and our archives and our galleries are beginning to recognize that and are finally celebrating and enabling that recognition. As I was just saying to you, I've just come back from a day in London and had two wonderful exhibitions, a Judy Chicago exhibition, and now you see us at the Tate Britain, which was just showing all this myriad of amazing women artists that, had been hidden, had been vilified, had not been in the Royal Academy Institute. Although they'd painted the ceiling, they couldn't be in the room where the meetings were held. Extraordinary stuff. And I think that teachers are beginning to use that, and the resources are now there that weren't there 10 years ago. So, look around you, use what's in your community, and enable your students to actually recognize who they are and who they are with.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And how can we talk about the issue of the parents, or say Sue and then Lynn, about engaging them? Because again, they've got this perception of what they think is going to be. How about those schools or head teachers or, leads in PhD or whatever, where they may discuss, because it really should be embedded anyway. So when you're doing history, geography, everything, but forever whose responsibility is, how would you try and, how can they better engage those parents who may have a misunderstanding about what is going to be taught?
Well, I think your point is well made, that frequently it is from fear and from ignorance. So you let them see, what you're doing. You let them have a look at the resources, and show them the websites that you're utilizing, so that they can actually get a sense of that you are not. And I think this, it is extraordinary that this concept that if they get a lesson about LGBT people, they're changing, they'll change the sexuality. Now, I don't think people's sexuality is that fragile. I really don't. So, that recognition that because you're learning about something doesn't mean that's going to change your identity, and having that conversation with parents, I think, letting them, find out what their fears are. And 9 times out of 10, you will be able to allay those fears once they have the information and the knowledge. It comes from fear. It comes from ignorance. It comes from that media stoking up of horrendousment. And I think we just have to do the education. We are educators. We don't just educate the kids, we educate the parents as well.
Mm-hmm. And also, we sort of highlighted very briefly, it's really important to educate the wider teaching population, and that it's not just the LG or B or T teacher or member of staff.
Absolutely.
That is
Yes.
responsible. Lynn,
Yes.
I mean, I know you must do that. I mean, we work in schools and it's amazing sometimes you think, because some people are just teachers and they got on with their life, they're there 20 years and they've done no education learning about difference apart from their own. Lynn, you want to mention anything about education? I'm sure you do that.
So what I would say is that I think there's a lot of different things when it comes to the barriers, and there's lots of different ways over it. So sometimes a barrier can be, and we have to acknowledge it, that different people's religions say different things when it comes to LGBT plus people. And so that is often about, what is your school ethos? What is it when you walk through the gates of your school? What is the ethos and what's your school culture? And it's embedding it within that. This is that we want to be how we want to be as an organisation. There is also, when, as Sue says, giving them the materials, but it's outlining why it's important. What impact does it have? That really seems to make a difference. That reiterating that, just for example, you learn across the Vikings, you don't become a Viking. And it's not about telling people how to live your lives. It's just about telling people that some people live their lives this way. Some people live their lives this way. And it's not about actually saying anything is right, anything is wrong. It's just about saying it is. That's the simplistic part of it. But I do know for teachers, often we talk about, well, what can you do safely within your school? Start with a small step if you can't do, because there are just some school structures which they're not in a position to change, but they can do something about making their classroom more accessible. They can do something about outreach with colleagues. We have been working a lot kind of to support, and they have been doing a lot more. As Sue says, they didn't used to do so much, and they are doing a lot more to support LGBT teachers unions, LGBT plus teachers and LGBT plus people. So that has been a real shift. So unions are being supportive, so we can actually help people kind of engage with their teachers union to get some more support from that side. But you do make an interesting point about people may go through teacher training and then they'll have some top-up training during each year, but that's it, like an inset day at their school or something along those lines. They're not, and also how much of teacher training is set aside for this? Very little. So, if any, in some cases. So actually, you know, it's not sometimes for lack of willing, it's from lack of understanding or fear around the subject. And then you do have some areas where there are people who just don't want to do this because they morally think that that's their stance and they don't want to do anything on this. And I think that is a harder one to challenge, but then that comes back to the law and comes back to why we're doing it and our duty to safeguard. And at the moment, we do have a duty to create safe and inclusive education for LGBT plus people. So it is a case of making sure we do that. And it's about supporting the skill leadership to be able to do that as well at times. So there's a lot more work that kind of needs to be gone into that. Research really helps. So the research that's been done by some of the partners really makes a difference because it really shows what's there. And I think really getting out the stories of what it means and why it's being done. There is so much negativity out there that's been stoked within the media that it's difficult to get across. Like, this is a book, this is the book, this is what the book says. This is what we're doing. And it's about raising awareness in that, really helping. And I think it's also about training governors and getting into basically that side of things so that governors know exactly what this is, what their school approach is, why it's important. One thing that's been helpful, which is going to sound really odd, is Ofsted, because Ofsted has not been helpful for many other things for teachers. But within kind of looking at, is the school a safe space for LGBT plus people, that's been really helpful. And some schools have had to do something to be, because it's that old adage, if you measured on it, you're going to do it. Because there's some sort of measure, therefore they're having to do something. It may not be, all the bells and whistles. It may not even be very far from that, but having to do something in those spaces. And obviously, this is made up of there's a lot of teachers there that will have taught through Section 28, which was a time when you didn't talk about any of it. So you're still going to have many, many teachers that were from that time period within the profession when they just couldn't. So it is this learning phase through, really, as to why.
Brilliant. And like you mentioned earlier, you've got loads of resources that teachers and people can use. So anybody listening or watching, please go onto the Schools Out website to get the information. It's there to help you. You know, if you're having challenges, like Sue said and what Lynn said, let people see what it's about. It's something that's really about young people need to understand what's in the real world. They need to learn about different relationships who exist. It's no point making it invisible, because when they go into the real world, it is what it is. And I think people need to I'm like, come on, people, get with the real world. Anything else, before we start moving on to other things, I'm going to ask you about some other bits you're doing. Anything else or advice either of you want to say about the importance of LGBT plus inclusion in schools? I'll say start with Sue.
We've just had a very difficult period, the last couple of weeks, with a minority of people causing incredible pain and havoc and violence, because of ignorance, because of the right wing telling the most appalling lies. Social media has been used as a very vicious weapon against other people, and it's had the most appalling effect on people's lives. And I think it's our job as teachers to mitigate against those things. And if it happens against Black people and brown people and immigrants, it's also happened against LGBT people, it's happened against disabled people, it happened against benefit users. I mean, it's been a real attack. And I think it's our job as teachers to recognize that our job is to educate, is to challenge that prejudice. And one of our straplines for Schools Out is educate out prejudice, all forms of prejudice. And that's our job. And I think, the work that we do enables that to happen. And it's crucial that it is done. We want to create a safe space which enables everybody to feel safe and to be able to learn. You can't learn in a place where you don't feel safe. So schools are a really important safe space, and sometimes it is the safest space because their home isn't safe. So, it is our job as teachers to give people the resources to enable schools to be a safe space and to challenge all the prejudice that they can come across on the internet, and give them the skills to actually recognize what is true and what is not true. And that's a really crucial tool, I think, that we need to give our kids, but I think also our parents. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that's come across from this is that a lot of the people who are out there were being taken down rabbit holes because they're in their 40s and 50s and have not had those skills on how to use the internet. So, it's a big job that we've got at the moment. Where as Lynn was saying, we're at a pivotal point at the moment in a lot of areas. And, as teachers, we have a big job to do, but we do give you the resources to help you do it.
Yeah, I would say, I would just say as well as it's also that remember that we are creating the next lot of citizens of reflecting the next lot of citizens, and they need to know what the real world's like, and that's all sorts of different people, and that they're going to have to get on with all sorts of different people. And I think that's a really important lesson. Sue often talks about this, about the link between bullying and hate crime in later life. And you could look at different things, and actually, if some of the language and rhetoric that was used in schools was used when they turn 18 out of schools, then that actually could be a criminal offence. And so it's one of those things where it's really important that people know this and know that actually how you need to that you're going to have to interact with lots of different people. But I think another kind of another teller of this is we often talk about that sometimes it's older generations that aren't as accepting. That's not always just the case. It's sometimes young people are not, depending on what they're being told in their home environments and what they're seeing. And one of the worrying things came up with a lot of schools do like a mock election. And in a lot of schools, they're kind of a far right party won in their schools, like the mock of that, which to me is quite frankly terrifying, and means that we need to look at critical thinking and how do we assess things, as Sue says, and we really need to be able to teach those skill sets. So especially in a world of social media and in a world where, your Instagram account can look one way and life can be completely different. And it's really being able to tell that difference between them, and giving people the skills to do that for later on in life. So, yeah.
Brilliant. No, so true. And I think I said it's we've got to think about, about to start singing children are our future then, but you've got to get them ready for the real world. And like you say, it is a safe space. I, do work in schools and sometimes had some really interesting conversations, and it is younger. See, people have the perception, I do training with a lot of people, they'll go, oh, young people, they're all really LGBT plus inclusion. I've been, had lots of conversations and debates with young people where they're absolutely not, and they've sort of said, look, and so absolutely the education needs to go to the young people. Schools need to be not afraid of doing that, to understand, there's a lot more schools around misogyny, for example, and LGBT and all that, and they need to make sure they don't step away from LGBT inclusion, because sometimes, as we said, because they're not educated and it's challenging for them, so they don't want to do it. So we need to, fight the fear, people, all those people out there, fight the fear and do it anyway, please, because that's the only way we're going to progress. So, one thing I know, all you do, a lot about education. Sue, tell me a little bit about Outing the Past and the outreach.
Outing the Past was set up by one of our members, Dr. Jeff Evans, and he said to me after we'd set up LGBT History Month, which was in 2024, and the first one was 2025. We had 10 years of LGBT History Month. And the whole point of LGBT History Month is that because we're tiny, there's only about 5 or 6 of us, we punch way above our weight, but the website looks good and everything, we designed it so people would take off and do their own thing. And so 10 years in, people were doing wonderful things, but we weren't getting much history. So Jeff said, okay, let's set something up to enable people to actually give us the history. So he came up with this idea of Outing the Past, and we put out a call to ask people to write presentations or do videos or do plays which explored LGBT history. And we got all sorts of very interesting venues, from Victorian Albert, British Museum, to, tiny little pubs and universities. And we asked for people to offer their stuff, and we had about 100 presentations, which we, over the years, which they could choose from, and then we would put them on, and they would choose what they put on, and it might be for a day, or it may be once a week throughout the month. So it's been a really exciting way for both academics and excited amateurs to share their learning about LGBT people. Sometimes it's been about suffragettes, lesbian suffragettes. It's one of the things I'm passionate about. I mean, when we learned about suffragettes at schools, how many of us learnt that there were Indian ladies, women, that there were working class women, that there were lesbians and gays? No, we weren't told any of that. It was all white middle class women. So, it's again, it's that whole, it's reclaiming our histories, doing the work and actually saying, we were there. I mean, we were there in the caves.
Exactly. People sometimes saying LGBT people just suddenly, you go back in, even like particularly what we said, there's been awful rhetoric around, and not even hate around trans community. Look way back where there weren't history, you'll find trans people. They weren't just suddenly popped up in the 2000s, you think, oh my God, people, educate yourself, look it up there.
Yeah, but of course it's very hard to educate yourself if the information isn't there, and that's one of the things that LGBT History Month has done, has enabled people to, and the same way as a Black History Month has done, is actually wake people up to recognize there's untapped knowledge that needs to be pulled in and to be enabled for us people to see. I mean, when I first began to sort of try and find lesbians in history, I went to the British Library, and probably could have worded it better. I said, I'm looking for lesbians. Well, the look I got was was kind of interesting. But I spent weeks there, and I got a little box, a whole series of cards of women that, the word lesbian was never mentioned, but it was, close companion, long life friend, all these wonderful euphemisms. And then you have to do more work and you begin to discover, and the language wasn't there, but we were hidden in plain sight if you began to think through the issues. And that's what the work has been done to enable people to recognize, in the same way that, we weren't told amazing people who'd done amazing things were Black, or that we were women. I mean, Virginia Woolf said anonymous was always a woman. So it's reclaiming and enabling people to recognize that so many of us have been hidden, and it's getting us back into the limelight and the spotlight, and being able to say, look, this is where these contributions have come from. This is where our history really is. And, we'll constantly be doing this work because, white patriarchal history has hidden so many people, and we have to constantly lift up layers to discover all those hidden people. And I think that's the work that LGBT History Month and Outing the Past has done. And it's been very much linked to the work that Black History Month has done, that Women's History Month has done, that Southeast Asian, now we have Trans History Month, and that recognition that, we need to spend some time discovering and enabling and utilizing and visibilizing all this wonderful hidden history.
Yeah. No, definitely brilliant. And I think, like I said, and you're even helping people. Yes, we want people to look, but you're giving them that information. So everybody out there, get on and have a look because it's out there for them. We've mentioned LGBT history quite a lot. I'll come back to you, Sue, but I'll ask Lynn for now. So you've sort of mentioned, Sue, when it was come about, and it's, oh my God, it's global now. Like you said, you're small but mighty at the, at schools and LGBT, because it's like everybody knows about it, not people do things. Lynn, and then I'll go back to Sue, but how do you feel that it's changed, in terms of people's awareness, knowledge, expectations of LGBT plus History Month?
I think you only have to look about the numbers of people and different organisations that celebrate it and mark the month. So, I mean, in the UK, we didn't used to have a Pride Month. That's a fairly new thing because that was more in America than the UK. So LGBT History Month celebrates 20 years next year. And Sue will talk to you more about the origins of that because the origins of that are really important. But the success of it originally was around education settings and museums. But what it's been really great to see is that actually businesses actually really embracing it for their staff and telling their history. And what I love about the month is that actually for a while it was so much, although schools out set the theme and everything else, a lot of people were like, who does that? Who just sets that? And there's actually, so we spent quite a bit of time kind of relinking the name back together so people can remember that, so that we can provide the resources for the month and get people knowing the theme and getting that out there. But I think it's the fact that you see it in so many kind of libraries and local authorities. It's mainstream throughout History Month. And there's still people that don't know about it. We were at Black Pride as part of our outreach work because we go to various prides across the country. We make sure we go to UK Black Pride and Bi Pride and Para Pride and Student Pride, as well as the kind of London Prides and Margate and other ones across the country. And we do that to get the kind of message out there. But in there, we asked, when is LGBT History Month? And only 50% of people knew. So we did a poll and only 50% of people knew. And that's really, so I think you can't be complacent with these things. And obviously, History Months there are a variety of them around the world. The first one was in America. We did find, Sue and I and Rodney founded an international LGBT History Month group, which is to help found other history months. And since then, there's been about 3 new ones founded. They happen in different months across the year, countries, based on something specific for their country and their organisation. And the large proportion of them have been founded by teaching groups. Interesting. Not all of them, but the majority of them have been founded from teachers or from teaching organisations. And there are a variety of sizes as well. Some are growing, some are brand new. But UK LGBT History Month is for the whole of the UK. It's definitely there in the kind of diversity calendars for people, but we really want people to embrace it and really share what they do. So we know this amazing work goes out and we see it and we repost it, but we're trying to make sure people, because we have an official calendar, which we push all of our details out so we can help. And we also produce packs. So there's the school side of things, but there's the business side. So if I talk about the business side and Sue can talk about the school side, but on the business side of things, we produce packs so that organisations can do things about it. There's short videos, there's posters, there are resources which they can use in an easy way. So if they're not very far along their LGBT plus journey, they've got something they can just pick up and run with. And if they're further along in their journey, they can do other things. We also, there's a whole section on the website, you can book us to speak, and that's what raises funds for the charity. And so our corporate speaking events are really important, not just because they hit the wider community. We're not just speaking to an LGBT plus crowd, we're speaking to the wider community, and it's about our ethos about education for all and LGBT inclusive education for all. So that means that we can get into businesses, we can talk about the brilliant things that LGBT plus people have done. And it's not, if some people and some organisations are not very far along their journey, it's nothing controversial. It's just that these are 5 brilliant LGBT plus people who have done things throughout history and amazing things, and this is what they've done. So it's a really good way to start the conversations if organisations are earlier within that journey. So I think it's just been amazing from its very first origins, which Sue will talk about, to now. But if I hand to Sue to talk about
Yes,
a little bit more about why it started.
Yeah, what you've not mentioned about the origins, and then a little bit about how we help schools with LGBT History Month.
Well, Paul Patrick was my CEO. We were co-chairs of Schools Out, and he was a teacher, another drama teacher, and I think it's quite interesting that we were both drama teachers, both very much involved in theatre and drama. I think there's a definite link. And one school, when Section 28 it went with a whimper. I mean, there was no big thing that happened, which was really weird in a sense, given the massive media attention that the actual act had and the effect that it had.
Mm-hmm.
So we looked at each other and said, well, look, we've got to do something. This is ridiculous. And Black History Month did exist. As I'm sure you're aware, however, frequently Black History Month was telling the history of Black people in America, not necessarily Britain. So that was a biggie for us, that if we were going to set up LGBT History Month, we did want it to be, about British stuff. I mean, obviously we want to include America, Stonewall, the amazing event in Stonewall in New York, which kicked off gay pride and everything else is important, but we had our own here in this country as well. So we wanted to do that. So Paul and I decided, okay, we will have an LGBT History Month. We chose February because it was a quiet month at that stage in the school calendar, and it had a half term. And that was really important because what we wanted was, in the past, libraries had done some really exciting work. In fact, the whole ridiculosity of Section 28 was about, one of the things was about a particular book, Jenny Lives, with Eric and Martin, that had been in a teacher's resource library, never got into schools. Total lies were told about that. So many lies, exactly what the same is going on now. So many lies were told about what was happening in schools that weren't happening at all. So we thought, right, okay, if we have a half term, if libraries and museums grab it, then teachers and parents and kids may see something in that half term, which will then give them the confidence to take it back into schools. So that was why we chose February. Can be an awkward month weather-wise, but anyway, it's a bit of warmth in February. So we chose that. We went to the Department of Education and told them what we wanted to do, and it took them ages, but we did eventually get a very small grant to set up the website. And my vision was that we would have, and this is, websites back in those days were very, very minimal. But I wanted it to have a calendar on there so people could tell us what they were doing. Because, as I say, there's only 4 or 5 of us. We can't do that much. But what we can do is spread the word. So we got the word out. We stated it was happening. We had a launch, and at that point I was in Southwark, and Southwark had just appointed an LGBT worker. So one of his first jobs was to deal with this mad woman who said, I'm setting up LGBT History Month. I want a place to launch it. And he found us the cinema at Tate Modern, which was amazing. And I set up the launch. We had 13 people on the stage. And I deliberately did that. And we had 3 of those were trans people. So we had Black people, we had Jewish people, we had 3 trans people, we had able-bodied, we had disabled. From the very beginning, there was that plethora of people up there saying we are a diverse community. And if anybody calls it Gay History Month, I'm not a happy bunny. It's LGBT plus now. So that whole concept of the wide inclusivity is crucial to us. So we launched it in November because it's in February. If you don't get people thinking about it before Christmas, Christmas can get in the way. So we launched it in November, and I thought, well, if we get 10 or 12 events for the first year, I'll be happy. We had over 100. So, the appetite was there, and people, bless their hearts, have absolutely grabbed it from now on. So as Lynn says, it's now mainstream. I mean, no local authority worth its salt won't do something. So it has been grabbed by people. People have recognized its importance. People do the most exciting and amazing things, from, painting zebra crossings in rainbow colors, putting up flags. Now, putting up flags on a bureaucratic building isn't something easy. The amount of work you have to do to get a rainbow flag up can be phenomenal. So it's those sort of visual things, putting on conferences, putting on dances, putting on theatre. And out in the past, which you alluded to earlier, our first one 10 years on from LGBT History Month actually found an event which was not unsimilar to Stonewall, which was actually in the late 18th century, in the 1880s, early 19th century, which was an extraordinary event. We had 3 of them. And Stephen Hornby, who is our resident theatre person, frequently puts on the most exciting theatrical events, which have been supported by research into history. So, we use all sorts of different ways of getting the message out, from lesson plans to conferences to theatrical experiences, constantly finding different ways to communicate the amazing work and contributions that LGBT people have done. And one of the things that Lynne has done in recent years has really enabled us to focus on what we're doing in Britain, so that we're constantly enabling people to recognise the British contribution and don't get pulled over to America or Australia or Europe, but recognise, here in this country have been the most amazing, exciting people doing the most extraordinary stuff, which you need to know about.
Definitely. Brilliant. And every year you have a theme, don't you? So Lynne, tell us what the theme we've just committed is just been, and then theme for next year, because I know you've already sort of done the planning for that.
Yeah, so what we do is each year we pick a theme. To be honest, we pick it sometimes 3 years in advance, so we kind of know, and then we just review it to make sure the theme still works. So in the past, they didn't always have they always had a theme, but they didn't always have a curriculum link. But partway through, Andrew, who does our promotions, he said, let's bring in a curriculum link, which we did. So they used to be things like science or English. And since then, we've kind of branched out to be a more broader theme to recognise that it's not just education settings that are doing this. So last year's theme, for example, was Behind the Lens, and was people who work in the TV and film industry, but behind the lens. So not just actors and actresses, everybody that supports that industry. We thought that was incredibly important, especially after the pandemic and everything that had happened, and because there are so many LGBT plus people within the creative industry. And from a kind of education point of view, there's so much you could do with that because there's so many different professions within there. So that worked really well from that point of view. We were also wanting to kind of encourage people to actually speak to LGBT plus people and find out about them, and from themselves, not from the media. So it was that wider scope of, let's look a bit deeper, that kind of embedding critical thinking for the wider community. And then this year's theme has been medicine and healthcare. So it's been under the scope, so under the microscope. And as part of it, we do a national badge competition during June and July, and schools can enter to create the badge for the next year. And then their badge is chosen. The young person who wins gets £250 and some books and the badge made up. And they can choose to be public, they can choose to be private. It's all run through the schools, so we no direct contract with the children. It's just directly through the schools and the education or the youth groups that they're a part of. And we used to have our badges designed. We've had it done by designers, we've had it done by universities, and we moved about 3 years ago to having schools design it, and it's been brilliant. We've had some really lovely, brilliant designs. And those badges are made, and that's what supports us. And we also, around the theme, we highlight 5 people from history, from LGBT plus. We try to span kind of centuries and try to kind of a broad range of history and across all of that, England, Ireland, Scotland, and Northern Ireland as well. So it's kind of, we try to make sure we do the whole of the UK and Wales as much as possible within 5 people, which is quite challenging. As well as have people that are very diverse within that group. And what we do then is provide resources for teachers, so videos, fact packs, posters, and actual schools resource packs for primary and secondary education. And we also provided for the first time this year some of our media resources in Welsh, and we will be doing that again next year in Gaelic as well, Scottish Gaelic and Irish Gaelic. So we're kind of making sure we can be inclusive across the gamut. For the wider group, we also highlight 28 people, so 1 a day, or 29 if it's a leap year, to make sure which are a mixture of people who are currently working in that area or who historically worked in that area, or historical figures. And that's across our social media platforms, and you can sign up to get the newsletter for it. And that enables you to learn about 28 people who have done amazing things in that area, and gives us a bit more flexibility. And it's not designed specifically for school settings, it's designed kind of for workplaces and across the gamut. And so next year's theme, which we picked a long time ago, but is very, very apt, is activism and social change. And what we do is we have a launch in November where we talk about the theme in detail. We introduce the 5 people That's done, so you can join it online, so it's not a barrier not being, and then in a venue. This year's one will be in London, but it does vary. And then at that point, we'll be running some free sessions, both for education sessions, and then some pay what you can sessions for businesses, about how you can celebrate LGBT History Month. And pretty much what we spend that period of time, from kind of November to January, supporting organisations to be able to deliver something during History Month. And in History Month, we will post about and celebrate what you're doing, as long as you tell us and put it on the calendar, so we know about it. And we usually have a hashtag for the year as well, and which is going to be social activism is our hashtag for this one. And we didn't know what was going to happen with the world, but the actual theme, we feel, is a really strong one. And we're concentrating on LGBT plus people who have created social change through activism. And we've looked at different ways people have done activism, because there's many different ways to do that. But we've concentrated on social change that's been wider than just social change for the LGBT plus community, because as LGBT plus people, we've helped create social change for many other people, not just ourselves.
I mean, it's brilliant how much it's grown. I mean, from way many years ago, before we came on, I was saying I met Sue probably 15 years ago. And it's like, God, what has happened since then is amazing. But my little bugbear are those people who do LGBT History Month as a little tick box, as a little, we're going to change our logo and have the flag, and then deep down, it's not really an inclusive organisation for LGBT plus people. And like we've said, it's about changing the narrative. People need to know that the history, because of the white patriarchy, people don't know about, people that were in existence for many years who have done so many wonderful things. What advice would you be about how they can build on from that? Because I'm starting with a positive, right? I'm assuming they're doing it so they're at the start of their journey and not doing it just the tick box. For those of you who are starting there, what else could they do? Because they're doing it fine, but they need to do more. So, Sue, what advice would you give?
Well, I think one of the things that is something that Lynne knows a lot about, and I've been doing a lot of work around as well, is networks. So I think LGBT networks can be very useful, both within schools and within organisations. And networks can do two things. They can support the LGBT people within the school or within the organisation, and give them confidence and get them to look at their situation. Are the policies in place which support them, that need to be supported? And it can also look at, what is the school or the company doing for LGBT people generally. And I think one of the things that's very exciting is that, particularly, I think, in both in this country and in America, that there have been companies who have been working against the political climate and have actually been very clear that they want to, even though that there's been, very anti-trans stuff, or there's been even laws which is in America that have been put in to make trans people's lives very difficult and LGBT people's lives very difficult. They have said, no, up with this, we will not put. We are aware of the work that needs to be done. And I think one of the things that has shifted over the years is the recognition that LGBT work isn't just morally necessary, that it's actually commercially necessary. That actually, if you do it properly and if you do it effectively, then A, you keep your staff. They don't keep moving so much because they feel safe and they feel recognized. And B, there's a lot of people out there who will actually look very carefully at both schools and companies to see what their work is and how are they supporting LGBT or green work or anti-racist work. And more and more people are actually checking and making sure it isn't just green. Yes, they're not just doing the green wash or the black wash or the pink wash. Is it real? And, I think that recognition, companies have come to recognize that it isn't just a moral thing. It is a commercial thing as well. They will do better if they actually do take this work seriously. And we need to help them to recognize that. And I think LGBT networks are a part of that process. So I think that's important. And I think also in countries where the laws are in place, again, we can use that. And where the laws are, again, then I think companies need to be enabled to recognize they can make a difference. They can challenge some of those things. And I think, the work that's been done within the Commonwealth where a high proportion of the anti-LGBT has come from, because Britain has exported it. Let's be honest, we are the exporters of homophobia. We've done it to our Commonwealth, and we've also Section 28 got exported to Russia and to Eastern Europeans. So we have a lot to recognise that Britain has played a horrendous game that we take responsibility for and need to start doing work on. So the support of organisations like Kaleidoscope, Hope Not Hate, all these crucial organisations that are challenging prejudice, if we can get behind them and support them, that's crucial work. And I think some schools and some companies are recognising that is work that they need to take on board and take seriously.
Yeah, I'd just say that it's how you do it as well. So you can tell organisations that have really understood what they're supposed to be doing. I can't think what the TikTok version of that is, but that was in my head at the moment. Understood the assignment. That's what I was thinking. You can tell organisations that have understood the assignment because they talk about it in a diverse way. Organisations that are newer in their journey may just pick up on one person. So Alan Turing seems to be one that's a very, very frequent one that people do if they don't know so much history. So what we'd say is take a look at the website, because there's loads of people you could choose from. And there are some resources so you can make it more diverse to reflect your workforce. But it's also looking at your LGBT history for your sector or for your actual kind of tailoring it that way. I think it's really important that LGBT History Month is celebrated, almost in a sense more than Pride Month, because it's actually getting education out there. It's actually making sure that from a business perspective that you're showing you're supporting that community. And I think it's definitely working with other organisations. I think that's one of the biggest ways you can show genuine support of the LGBT plus community. Is not just work with an LGBT organisation, and not maybe just the big ones, some of the smaller ones as well. And also with your local communities, which is something we don't necessarily do. But I think it's a good starting point. If you're at the beginning of your journey, you could just pick up the resources, because at least they will be diverse. If you are kind of further down in your journey, it needs to look like it's visible change. And it isn't just the tick box because you need to do something to get in a particular index or something along those lines. It is one of those things where it needs to be coming from the organisation, but it shouldn't always be relying on your people, i.e. your LGBT plus networks and stuff, to design it all for you. It shouldn't always rely on, although it's really important that people within your business feel like they can share their stories, they shouldn't always be made to. It has to be that kind of balance between it. And there's a lot of LGBT history out there. So just if your organisation saying, "Oh, we don't have any LGBT plus people," I might laugh slightly. But if you do say that, and maybe you just don't know you have any LGBT plus people, yeah, there's a lot of information out there. So it's about educating yourselves more on the topic. And learning it is a learning curve. And for some people, the first thing is for some people to just get a flag up could actually be really have had to have months of work. So I'm less critical of that, as long as it's backed up with other things, because for some organisations that is a real step. For some organisations, gatekeeping their social media is massive, and you have to jump through many, many hoops to get anything on there. Yet they may be doing brilliant stuff inside they're just not talked about. So I don't believe that they should pink wash or any other term or rainbow wash in any of the terms. But I do think we have to be mindful of where people are on their journeys and support them to get to the next step. But tokenism is something that you can really see a mile off, and people will call you out. Fundamentally, people will call you out. And sadly, unfortunately, people do go back into the closet when they go into the workforce. That's well documented. And you're losing out on talent, and people will pick jobs to see where they're safe, because they don't want being LGBT plus to impact their career still. And that is something that's a genuine thing. Just picking up on Sue's perspective, if you have offices in different countries, be mindful that LGBT History Month is taking place in different times in different parts of your business, and one shouldn't supersede the other. It is just a case of, this is for your European branch, it might be this month, or for this particular branch, it might be this month. I think that's really kind of universally to look at it, but it's also to look at things like Lila does this amazing embassy model and talks about how if you're in a country where the laws don't support you, how you can become kind of like a mini embassy and still support staff within the laws of that country, but still share your stance. And I think it's really working with people like Lila, who does Pride in Education, to really kind of work that out for your business so you're fully supporting your staff wherever they are.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to draw it to a close, even though when I do this podcast, I could be here talking all day. But is there anything, Sue, we'll start with you want to say, you haven't had a chance to say around whether it's LGBT History Month, Schools Out, LGBT Inclusion, Education, whether that you think people you need to share that you haven't had an opportunity?
I think it's just a question of, if you hadn't started, start. If you are doing it, tell us. I think sharing is really crucial. We can all learn. I'm still learning. There's so much to learn. And so always share. On our website, there is a place where you can tell us what you're doing or tell us if you need something more. And I can't go away without saying buy a badge. Really important to buy the badge. That's what funds us. I mean, we are tiny. We have no core funding. So, keep us going by buying your badge. And it's on the website. You can buy it. The more you buy, the cheaper they are. We also do the lanyards. So, yes, support us both by doing the work and, if you can, buy a bit of the stuff which enables us to keep going. And thank you for all the wonderful work you're all doing out there. It's so much appreciated.
Yeah, so I'd say our website is www.schoolsoutuk.org. That's www.schoolsoutuk.org. Sounds like an infomercial, but please take a look at our website. It's updated. We're across all social media, either under LGBT History Month or under Schools Out. We are there to support you. We have lots of information. We want to see as many organisations taking part in LGBT History Month this year. It's really simple to do. We really encourage you to do. We'd love to see every organisation do it. And that would be absolutely amazing to hear everything that they've done. What I would say is that we are an organisation that definitely needs funding, as many organisations do. But I think what a lot of people don't realise is that we have a project worker that we fund for a specific project 1 day a week, and that's it. Everybody else gives their time for free, and yet we have such a national standing, and we still want to be able to give our resources to schools for free, and that's why we do that. But we do need funding. So anybody out there that can help us with funding or sponsorship, please reach out. And our email address is info@schoolsoutuk.org. That's info@schoolsoutuk.org. Please reach out, see if you can work with you. We'd love to work together. And thank you so much for everybody who celebrated LGBT History Month throughout the year.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Our wonderful guests, Sue and Lynne. We really hope you found this useful. Please do listen to what they've said in terms of what you can do, how you can raise the profile, how you can deal with the challenges, but also support Schools Out. Like you said, buy the merch, get involved, use the information that they've all done that hard work to find for you, and get ready so you can use in your organisations or schools. So thanks, Sue. Thanks, Lynne. Until we see each other again. Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.